Welcome back to The Look and Sound of Leadership, an ongoing series of executive coaching tips designed to help you be perceived in the workplace the way you want to be perceived. I'm Tom Henschel, your executive coach, and today we're talking about staying afloat in a shitstorm. Rana had reason to be upset. Her reputation for making large-scale sales was well known. She'd been hired by a company and placed on a division leadership team that had been together for years, in some cases decades. That leadership team, which included women, had no interest in welcoming this outsider who was supposed to boost their performance. Any success she generated, they figured, could only reflect badly on them. During our coaching sessions, Rana told me she found the team's blatant displays of disrespect appalling. Over and over, they would tell her flat out her ideas were bad and wrong, although they knew she had done it before, which is why the company had hired her. When one of her ideas actually got approved, the team simply ignored it and continued doing what they had always done. At one session, while she was telling me yet another galling incident, she sighed and said, "Every conversation with every one of them feels like a battle. I am tired." She spoke those powerful feelings quite neutrally. She went on saying, some days I just stop working. I have to. I close up my computer and go for a walk. Better I do that than send off a flaming email, which is what I want to do a lot of the time." "But you don't," I said. "That wouldn't get me anywhere," she said, shaking her head. Neither of us spoke. And then I said, "Rana, may I give you some feedback?" She raised her eyebrows, a little surprised. "Sure," she said. "Thanks," I said. "You and I have been talking for months. These stories haven't changed much. If anything, they've escalated. But you haven't. This situation really sucks. You didn't create it. You don't deserve it. But you are in it. I think most people in your situation would be upset. That would not surprise me. But you seem very cool about all of this, which does surprise me. I applaud you, Rana. Actually, I'd like to know your secret." Dismissively, she shrugged and repeated herself, closing the computer and walking away. I nodded. "Okay, that's great. Take a time out. But I'm guessing there's more." She looked at me, then smiled. "Oh yes, there is more." She took a breath and said, "My dad was what they used to call a titan of industry. He used to say his work was like playing chess where the pieces were the size of cities. My dad played at a pretty high level. When I was 11 or so, he started telling me stories about his work. Maybe he had always told them to me, but that was when I really started being fascinated. He would explain that there was a decision to be made, and he would explain the stakes. The decisions might be about millions of dollars or thousands of people. I remember once the future of an entire town hung in the balance. So he would tell me about the different people on the different sides of the decision. He would tell me what they'd say, and he would tell me what they would do. And I got to tell you, my dad was a good storyteller. He could paint a nasty villain. And I was all in. I would hear about these people. I would get so mad. And he would always tell me the same thing. He would say, "Rana, they're doing their best." And I would get outraged even more because to me that was like an excuse. I wanted those people to be accountable for what they'd done. I wanted people punished. And he would say, they might get held accountable someday, but don't forget the game you're playing. He'd say, "You see, now I know something that helps me play the game. Now that I know what their best looks like, I know how much I can count on them or not count on them. My game just got a whole lot better because I know what their best is." Rana nodded and smiled, thinking about her dad. And then, still nodding, she said, "It took me a long time to really believe in the idea of they are doing their best. First, I thought it made me superior, like I was looking down on them. But the core concept is really about acceptance. You have to accept that some people do things like that. They do. Some people do things that are jaw-dropping. It can be hard to accept. I made a sound of agreement. She said, so here I am. I'm in a shitstorm, no doubt about it. But these guys, they're doing their best. If I can accept that and keep my eyes on the bigger prize, then it's my move on the chessboard. I can do whatever I want. The power is with me. I said, what a gift, Rana. Thank you for sharing all that. Can I ask a question? Sure, she said. How did you get there? How did you get to acceptance? She thought, and then said, partly being a mom, I think. To me, being a good mom is all about acceptance. Unconditional positive regard. These kids are truly doing their best. I try to live by that every day. And let me tell you, it is a challenge, but I have learned a lot about acceptance. So these days, I can get to acceptance a lot faster than I used to. And acceptance always makes a better outcome, especially in a hot mess like this. I said, acceptance creates better outcomes. Ooh, I love that. It's true for me, she said. Look, I don't know what's going to happen here. I won't be surprised if I end up leaving. But while I'm here, I'm going to do my best. And I'm going to be my best. And to do that, I have to believe that these guys are doing their best. I said, I hear how helpful it is to you, Rana. I'm so glad you have that story in you. Well, there is a downside to it, of course, she said. There is? What's that? I asked. Doubt. As if scolding herself, she said, I mean, come on. Do you mean to tell me that their best wouldn't have been better if you weren't here? You must have done something to make this shit show happen? That's the flip side. If this is their best and this is where it got us, I must have had something to do with it. I said, you and I have talked about your doubts. Do you feel stuck in doubt? No, she answered, no worse than normal. But I do wonder why I do it at all. Do what? I asked. Turn on the self-doubt, wonder if I'm the problem. I don't know why I do that. I nodded. It's a reasonable question. You've noticed a pattern, and you want to understand it better. Great. I just feel I have to point out that you and I, in our coaching, are not going to answer that question about why you turn on the doubt. We aren't, she asked. No, I said, why questions are psychological questions. Why do I find myself in this situation over and over? Why do I say the things I say? Why? The answer to why questions are somewhere inside your thoughts and your feelings. And a good therapist will guide you through the forest and help you find your answers. But I am not a therapist. I'm a coach. I can't guide you to why answers. But I can give you a good workaround for the situation. But I could do both, she said. Oh, for sure, I said. I'm a big proponent of good therapy. It's a perfect complement to coaching. She nodded. So let's suppose I was beating myself up about something. You have a workaround for stopping the cycle? I do, I said. It has 3 parts. You want to hear them? Go ahead, she said. Okay, first let's consider what we're trying to do. We're trying to stop the hamster wheel of doubt. We want to quiet the constant why questions, right? That's when these 3 steps come in handy. The first step, clarify the issue in your own head. What is the issue really? What am I upset about really? What do I wish were different? Exactly. You will not ask yourself why you want that thing. You will ask yourself, what is it that I want? Precisely. That's part 1. Part 2, you ask yourself, if that's what I want, if that's where I am, how do I feel about that? How am I? She said, when I'm stuck in doubt, doubt is the only feeling I recognize. It's interesting to think there might be other feelings. Huh. Okay, what's step 3? You ask yourself, what do I want to do now that I know my situation and I know how I feel? What action do I want to take? As you would say, it's your move on the chessboard. I took a breath and said, those 3 steps can break a cycle of doubt. She nodded. That little workaround has a lot of acceptance in it. If you want to move to action, Accept what's going on. Maybe that's the lesson of the day. When you're in a world of trouble, acceptance helps. I echoed her earlier statement. Acceptance creates better outcomes. We were both quiet. And then I said, I learned a saying from my dad that has a lot of acceptance built into it. What was it? She asked. I said, my dad was a junior officer in the Navy during World War II. The one saying he brought home that I heard over and over was, there's always some poor bastard who doesn't get the word. When things would go wrong, he would say that. Some poor bastard didn't get the word. And he would say it with real kindness. You know, things break, people get hurt, sometimes people die because some poor bastard didn't get the word. That's terrible, she said. I said, I never took it that way. I always took it to mean that when something bad happens, yes, most likely you can find the person who screwed up. But then, what if instead of blaming them, you think, it's not really their fault. They just didn't get the word. For me, it created compassion. Like for you, it created acceptance. She shook her head. But my situation isn't about them not getting the word. These guys know exactly what they're doing. Right, I agreed. But what if the word they didn't get was about how to play nicely in the sandbox with others, how to embrace change, how to live in a world of abundance? What if they just didn't get the word? Whoa, she said, and exploded finger bombs at her temples. That is acceptance on a grand scale. Rana ended up transferring to another division. Throughout all the chaos and frustration, her ability to accept the situation and her commitment to show up as her best self was a masterful display of the look and sound of leadership. There were 3 tools in Rana's story. I don't want to lose them, so here's a quick recap. When you are in the middle of a shitstorm, 3 tools you could use are shift towards acceptance. That's number 1. Stop being angry. They're doing their best. It's your move. That's number 1. Number 2, be alert for getting stuck in doubt. Shitstorms can make you doubt yourself. If you find yourself in doubt, here's number 3. Ask yourself what you want, what you feel, and what you want to do. Those were the tools in my conversation with Rana. Now I want to get to some more ideas about surviving shitstorms. Let me start by defining what I think a shitstorm is. Rana's shitstorm had a lot of players in it. And the victims and the villains seemed really clear. It was pretty dramatic because Rana was playing at a high level. She touched a lot of people. Now, shitstorms don't have to be big. Like your sphere of influence might be a lot smaller. You can still be in a shitstorm because shitstorms aren't about big or small. It's about how much of our own shit that storm stirs up in us. If you are stirred up, if you feel the stakes are high, if you hear yourself making up victims and villains, if you're experiencing doubt that is completely non-productive, you are in a shit show. It is your personal shit show. So that's the definition. Now, more tools. Did you hear me just now mention the stakes being high? That was a very intentional call out to a book that I know many of you already have, Crucial Conversations. The subtitle of Crucial Conversations is Tools for Talking When Stakes Get High. Tools for Talking in a Shitstorm. The book, really, it's had such a rich and long life because the authors are great storytellers, the book's fun to read, but the tools in it are simple and they are effective. One way to stay afloat in a shitstorm is to have some life vests ready for you, and Crucial Conversations will give them to you. Listen, this was really true for me in my own life. During the early years of my divorce, there were times, as you can imagine, when I found myself very irritated. In those moments, I would hear myself arguing in old arguments, even though I knew that the argument was really just a habit on both of our parts. We were never going to get anywhere. Crucial Conversations gave me a phrase to say in moments like that, actual words, like a script. And, I'm a former actor. I love a script. Crucial Conversations gave me the phrase, It wasn't my intention to. It suggested this phrase could diffuse tension when the other person was upset. And I remember using it with my ex. We were standing in her driveway, and I could feel us revving up into one of those circular arguments. And I said, "Hey, it wasn't my intention to make you defensive." And I didn't even have to say what my intention was. I saw her shoulders drop. I saw her face soften. And suddenly we were able to just kind of talk like people. And I felt like I'd been given a magic key. I felt like I was in some club because I knew that a whole lot of people already knew those tools. I will tell you, when you are in a shitstorm, it's great to have scripts you can call on. Crucial Conversations. It's got a lot of scripts. Okay. Do you remember a minute ago when I said, you know you're in a shitstorm when you find yourself making up victims and villains? I want to talk about what it means to make up victims and villains. Our brains use victims and villains to make sense of what's happening around us. And especially when we've lost control, making up victims and villains is automatic. Look, think for a second about how I told Ron a story to you. Think about the words that I used, how I talked about the leadership team. I used words like appalling and outsider and galling, and I ascribed their actions as aimed at diminishing Rana. It was a good story, right? It is an easy-to-grasp story. The framework of that story is how our brains serve up stories to us. Our brains deliver stories to us weighted in that way so that they support our view of the world, and we often do not question the story we're being told. I'm suggesting that one clue that it might be time to question the story you're hearing in your head is when you start painting villains. And it's hard to spot a villain, but, I think it's a little like trying to see an octopus that's camouflaged. It's hard to see at first, but you can learn to spot them. One thing to listen for in yourself is intent. Where have you ascribed other people's intent? Villains become villains because we assume they have bad intent. We assume they do not mean us well. The action here, assume good intent. They're doing their best. If you can assume good intent, if you can believe they're doing their best, you will not get stuck in victim and villain thinking. One more tool. You may remember I was talking about one way you can see yourself in a shitstorm is when you find yourself in a non-productive cycle of doubt. I have a thought about that, and I have a story that I really want to tell you about coaching versus therapy right after this month's gratitude. I want to begin this month with gratitude to Kevin Stafford, who hosts the Conversation with Coaches podcast. He had me back on his show. It was a great conversation about creating a sustainable coaching practice and also about the tension that I experience as an executive coach in my local ICF chapter. ICF is the International Coach Federation. I'm an active member here in the Los Angeles chapter. I know there are a lot of coaches who listen to the show, so here's a quick invitation to all of you. I host a special interest group through the Los Angeles chapter of ICF on executive coaching. We do it 6 times a year. It's a blast. People come from all over the world. If you're interested, there's a link in the show notes. Come join us. It is great. But this all began with my thanks to Kevin for another great conversation. The link for that is in the show notes. Gratitude this month to the many people who reached out to ask me about coaching. One person mentioned that she had been a little intimidated to reach out to me. She thought only big corporations could hire coaches, and she knew that her company wasn't going to pay for coaching for her. I assured her that we offer 2 kinds of coaching, corporate coaching and personal coaching. I created the personal coaching option years ago when listeners first started reaching out to me. I wanted to give people really good coaching at a price that's reasonable. It's not like I invented this model, by the way. A lot of my colleagues have options that are pretty much the same. My point is, thanks to those of you who reached out to talk about coaching recently. I am always grateful to hear your stories. I want to give gratitude to a wave of new listeners. It's been great to hear from you. I'm so glad you've joined us. Welcome. And finally, Gratitude to the people who helped bring those new listeners in. People who took a moment, who posted a review. This month, all from the United States: Mental Wolf, Neon Tapper, Geller 2015, Quiet Leader 27, and, as ever, Todd Thompson. Thank you for your reviews, and thank you for what you write. And I have noticed a trend lately of people writing about the fact that they were going back and listening to the entire back catalog. It is very gratifying to know that. And so thank you. That is this month's gratitude. Thank you very much. Okay. So what can you do to toss yourself a lifeline when you find yourself in a cycle of non-productive doubt? The question I would like to ask is, who gets to decide what is and is not, quote, productive? How do you know if it's productive doubt? Sometimes good things come out of doubt. Well, you get to decide whether it's productive or not. Each one of us gets to decide whether we are focusing our attention in a way that is productive or non-productive. Are we moving forward? One way to help yourself move forward: look at your own contributions. This is when why questions really can be your friends. Why questions can help you examine your motives and your feelings. If you aspire to be a leader who draws people towards you, you need to be able to look at your own part in things. Why questions can help with that. At the same time, be alert. Why questions demand that you turn your focus inward, right? But you can get to an answer, but the answer is never for certain. You could stay looking inward to look for more clues. There always might be more, right? Sometimes we forget to look up and see what's going on around us. Or if we do look up, we look up through that lens of doubt. The tool here is to be aware. Are you moving forward? Can you look up and see what's going around you? Having doubt is not unusual. I talk about it all the time with people. Confidence is an issue all the time with people. Sometimes as people are talking about their issues of doubt and confidence, they'll joke and they'll say, this feels like therapy. I understand why they would say that, and I clarify. Coaching and therapy are both great, but they are very different. Here's the metaphor I use to explain the difference. At the beginning, coaching and therapy actually share a lot of beliefs. One belief they share is that people, as they travel their road of life, hit potholes. Another belief in common is that potholes that people hit often are connected over a lifetime. They repeat themselves. Another belief that coaching and therapy share is that our present behaviors are shaped by our past experiences. That's in the beginning. Then, let's imagine you. You are driving down the road of your life. You hit one more pothole. You decide that's it. You want some help. And so you find a therapist. Here's what's going to happen. The therapist is going to ask you to pull over. You'll both get out of the car. You'll walk over. You'll look into the pothole together. The therapist is going to help you look at that pothole up close to see what you really notice about that pothole. And soon the therapist is going to teach you how to repair the pothole, one thin layer at a time from the bottom up. Every layer is a piece of healing. And you do layer after layer, and then one day your pothole is filled in. It's gone. You're free of it. That is the gift of therapy. It is a long, intimate process of healing. Now, what if you put a coach in your passenger seat instead of a therapist? How does that go? When you come upon a pothole, the coach is going to teach you how to drive around it. The pothole's still there, and your life would be better if the pothole were filled in. But in the meantime, the coach gives you a workaround. And by the way, that is for executive coaching. That is not at all true in the realm of life coaching. It's a completely different discipline. The only coaching I talk about on this show is executive coaching. When you find yourself in a shitstorm, you do not have to do it alone. You can work with a therapist, or you can work with a coach, or you can do some self-study in our archives. 3 categories in the library that might interest you are managing yourself, perception, how you perceive yourself, and self-talk. 5 episodes that you might listen to are Building Emotional Intelligence. That's really important for navigating a shitstorm, by the way. Coaching versus Therapy. There's a whole different set of ideas in that episode, by the way. Combating Emotional Hijacks. Don't Take Anything Personally. And Taming the Wild Child. This episode is built around a metaphor that I share with a lot of my clients, and they almost always experience it as a very powerful catalyst. I really want to encourage you to check it out, Taming the Wild Child. All the links are in the show notes. Help yourself to the coaching tools on our website. In fact, a really relevant tool for this episode is the Feeling Word Grid. The Feeling Word Grid is our second most downloaded tool after sorting and labeling. Being emotionally fluent is one more way to stay afloat in the shitstorm. There is a link to that and all the tools in the show notes. The tools are free. Help yourself. Okay, that's it from me. Until next time, I'm Tom Henschel. Thanks so much for listening.